All right, so we are going to kick off our final theme, which, as I said, is innovation, growth, and competitiveness. And I can't think of a better way to start off than a fireside chat on inclusion in the tech sector, both as a policy priority, but also as a broader mandate in talent. And so we're using Ruthe Farmer, who, as I already mentioned, has authored one of our initial 15 policy proposals. We're using her ideas as a jumping off point for our next fireside chat, which is titled Building a More Inclusive Tech Sector. So please join me in welcoming Ruthe Farmer, Chief Evangelist for CS4All, and Brenda Darden Wilkerson, President and CEO of AnitaB.org, to the stage. Thanks very much.
Are we on? We are on. Fantastic. So it's been interesting listening all day, and especially that chat from AAAS about, the inclusion and talent keeps coming up, and I think ultimately at the core of any innovation strategy is the talent that we have. And so the paper that I'm presenting today is focused on taking the efforts to increase participation and inclusion in computer science to the next level, really making this an urgent priority because we are at a critical moment in time when we have to address this, and not necessarily only from a kids need jobs, but it's like these are the young people that will create the technology of the future. And we need that to be all young people in all minds. So any discussion of innovation and growth and competitiveness needs to have talent at its core. The Department of Labor projects that there will be 3.5 million computing-related jobs by 2026, and we currently, with our pipeline, will meet 19% of that demand. So we've got a big gap. Globally, there's a 500,000 worker gap in cybersecurity, estimated by the ISC. So advancing inclusive computer science in the U.S. education system is critical to our talent pool, employability, economic opportunity, equity for youth, but at the same time, it bolsters our cybersecurity, our national defense, and it creates the incubator of innovation in our country. So I think computer science is really primed for the 2.0 big splash and a big aggressive initiative, which you can read about in the paper, with very detailed activities by all the agencies, could really make a difference in that. So Brenda, you have been both on the K-12 side, and now you're with AnitaB working on post-secondary and workforce issues around diversity. What are you seeing on the demand side? What's happening in industry?
So first of all, I'm so excited to be part of this discussion. It is definitely part of the passion that I've carried throughout my career. I actually started out as a technologist. So I started in the tech sector and then moved over to education. So I really love the conversation that happened earlier about how we need the ability to have folks move from area to area to really begin to build the bridges that are necessary to get these solutions that we need. So what we see happening, of course, in the tech sector is a huge need for skilled folks. And the gap that we've experienced over the last few decades just gets wider. So what should be happening is there should be a huge push for a much more diverse workforce and really tapping into the various pathways over the traditional pipeline conversation that we like to have, to make sure that we tap into both not just a short-term gain, but also the medium and long-term gain. And we totally have this covered for the foreseeable future because of how important it is. However, to do that, we will need some of the partnerships that we've talked about here today. We will first need to change the narrative around who can. Is a huge one that we still fight. Actually, when I was in technology, there were 35% women. We technically today have about 25%, and we battled back from about 12% at a low. So obviously, the issue is huge. The jobs are there. We need them. We're going to need them for the foreseeable future. What we need to change is our attitudes about who can, and then open up, and which is why this whole program is so important and critical.
So one of the things I like to talk about when I'm talking to industry about this is a numbers game for you. If you look at the K-12 population of this country has been majority minority for 2 years already. More than half of our kids are not white, and more than half of our kids are on free lunch. Likewise, 57% of college degrees are going to women. Now, if you look at the tech workforce, it's the mirror image of that. It's predominantly white and Asian, overwhelmingly male. And I'm going to guess that tech workers' kids aren't on free lunch. So let's just say if you're looking 10 years into the future, who's your potential workforce? You're going to need to be really strategic about how you start to bring people up, or you're going to have no one. And so if you look at Silicon Valley, the percentage of Hispanic employees in the tech sector is less than 10%. The K-12 schools of Silicon Valley are 53% Latino. So that means you have to import your talent from somewhere else and bear that cost unless you make the aggressive, innovative choice to incubate talent locally. And that, I believe, starts in the K-12 or the P-12 experience. I would love to see computational thinking across the Head Start system, please. That's part of my memo. So I see this as both an opportunity and a threat. So there's all this threat from China, big bad China, and this narrative is coming out right now. The thing that we have that China doesn't have is a diverse population native to our country. We are one of the most diverse nations in the world, and that is a competitive advantage. It has been proven over and over, hasn't it, Brenda, that diversity equals better innovation. There are multiple studies you can cite from Harvard, McKinsey, and everyone else to this point. Yet, we are not taking advantage of the global competitive advantage that our talent pool provides us as a country. So, thinking about it from that perspective, we're under a threat right now because we have not figured out how to bring up all kids and all talent into the pool. So you were in Chicago, and you guys got really innovative, and they made computer science a requirement for graduation in the second largest school district in the nation? Third largest. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so really exciting. So again, coming out of industry and going into education, which, by the way, I did because tech was not friendly, and I got my 1,000 paper cuts and I left thinking I couldn't have children and work in tech, which is still an issue that women face today. And so what I found when I got into the K-12 space is that the overriding inertia that existed there was that all the jobs had been offshored. Again, there's the narrative. And so we didn't need to prepare students for tech. And I thought, actually at one point, I was going to be asked to shut down the few tech programs that did exist in our district, a district of almost 500 schools. And so, of course, you can imagine what it looked like there. The few computer science courses that were offered in the most elite schools in the district to a very homogenous group of folks. And so, I heard someone say earlier today, I can't remember who, just how important the power of one person is. There was one teacher in one school who wanted to do something differently, who found 2 professors at a couple of the universities in our town who were willing to send them off to learn some innovative computer science curriculum training in another state. And out of that small group of people was born our initiative, which we named Computer Science for All. But one of the things that I had learned from my time in the district, and also having worked in higher ed, is that if you don't change policy, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And in the K-12 space, we've had the same course subjects for several centuries now. But we know the impact of having an educated populace. The whole purpose of education is to create a great citizenry that can contribute. And so core, if you think about it, should be to make sure that they have the core subjects that are necessary to make that happen. But yet, we've resisted changing our core subjects for those centuries. And so in Chicago, we decided to step out and be radical, as we like to be, and create a new core, which is what we did. Now, the reason why we did that, and what you'll see is there's been some great progress, right? So when we started a lot of this work, there were very few states where computer science was recognized for anything at all. But that's not the case anymore. It's 48 states recognize it for science or math. But the problem with that in making it truly democratized is the sequential nature by which students take science and math. So that still would leave computer science to an elite set of kids who got through all of the other 4 required math subjects or whatever the requirement was, state by state. And so that's why we decided to step out and make computer science its own core. And so every student, as of May of this year, in the senior class will be required to have computer science at least one course to graduate. And we added computer science all the way back to pre-K, so that just as we don't ask a student to take AP calculus without having had math lots of years, we thought it made sense to start students off and build progressively up to high school so that they'd have the best preparation possible to not only pass that class, but understand the opportunities available to them in following computer science.
So now what's happening in Chicago? You've got your first students graduating now with the requirement. What does that look like in terms of a demographic shift in the population of young people ready for computing?
Well, you know, we always like to talk about education in those terms that some of them you've already used, free and reduced lunch, first generation, all of those terms that carry stigma in my mind. But we're a district that have all of that, 85% free and reduced lunch. There are a lot of a large immigrant population there, so there are a lot of first generation college students, et cetera. But what we've seen happen in a very short period of time is when we first added computer science as a requirement at the high school level, we saw high school entrepreneurs. When we started to push it back into the K-8 space, we began to see middle school entrepreneurs. And we saw students who became much more mature about what they could think about doing in their life, whether or not they wanted to do computer science. We saw students who saw that because they could create and they learned how to iterate, that they could take charge of what they did with their lives. They all of a sudden understood that they could be more participatory than someone saying, okay, all you can do is X, Y, and Z. So we've already seen the impact on college graduation rates from these students. We've already seen, as I said, the entrepreneurship, which I think is key for a modern citizenry. We need these ideas from diverse populations, and that's what we're getting.
So we know that Chicago is one of the very, very, very few school districts of any size that requires computer science. And the response is always, we don't have enough teachers. We don't have enough teachers. So thinking about you went this challenge. I have to prepare 3,000 teachers in this district that are already there to teach computer science. But what about new teachers? What about the pipeline that creates teachers? What do you think we need to do about that?
So the first thing I want to say is there's nothing different about this work than anything else people do innovative. I would like to see the same sort of targeted funding come towards innovation within the type of work we're doing in our institutions that go in the private sector. So, I mean, that's the first thing. So what we had to do was, because remember, when we started, most people didn't want to even talk about computer science. They didn't know what it was. So we were selling them something that they had no knowledge of. And so we were going into make a decision to teach all students, 400,000 students, where there was no supply because there had been no demand, right? So we had to start with training, but then we had to go beyond that so that we could get pre-service teachers with this knowledge and skill set. But what we found was across the country, there were very few colleges that had computer science education.
Right,
as a
because
degree.
there's no certifications in place, so why would a college of education train a teacher to do something they can't be certified to do? So I think the statistic from 2015-16, in 2016, that school year, the total number of new teachers that came out of colleges of education with a degree to teach CS in the United States was 36. 11,000 new math and science teachers came out of the school system. So we're looking to do a lot of catching up, and I think the stat was there's now 38 states that now have certifications, but only 19 states have a university offering a place to get that certification. So I would like to see, and I would love to know from you, like, I'm recommending a huge federal investment in this infrastructure, building up the pipeline of pre-service programs, PhDs of CS education, not just PhDs of CS, but PhDs of CS education in colleges of education, training new PhDs. We've had 40 years to figure out how to teach math. We have put no effort into figuring out how to teach computer science. So thinking back and putting your Chicago hat on, if you were back in Chicago, what help could a big national initiative have given you in helping spread what you did beyond Chicago and to other places?
So it could help in so many different ways, and it's something that we would ask for now because this work is really just scratched the surface. So some of the levers that we were able to pull were, again, against that narrative and against those who are the most marginalized, which are women and people of color. So what we would find, and many times what people would say to me when I would introduce myself as an administrator in Chicago Public Schools, they would say, oh, those kids. And I would say, no, those grown-ups, because it was the grown-ups who made the decision about where to fund particular programs. It was the grown-ups who made the decisions to allow white male teachers without CS degrees to teach CS, and black and brown female teachers with CS degrees to teach Microsoft apps. These are decisions that have to do with the narrative and the culture of who we expect can do these things. We have teachers, we had students who were not allowed to take courses because their counselors would counsel their parents against taking it because that's not for your student, because they didn't have the knowledge. So the whole conversation about the kitchen table, amazing, right? Because if mom and dad don't understand the value of this, then they can be sold the bill of goods by those who've not bothered to become educated about this as a national crisis. And I think that's what it is. We need to have people educated in order to keep up with all of the amazing projects and 10 times more that we heard about this morning. But if people are being talked out of it or left out of it, it won't happen.
One of my stats I like to throw out is I recently discovered that of the 545,000 kids who participate in junior ROTC, only 32% of them could take AP Computer Science if they wanted to. So we've got these programs and populations that we're working with already, and we're just not leveraging. And so I'm recommending some pretty precise things that we could be doing with each of these different federal investments we already make, like Head Start. So you now work with a community of thousands, 30, 40,000, and then global community of women technologists. So what do you think, if you were writing a day one memo about tech inclusion, looking at it from your lens as the CEO of Anita B, what would you want to do?
I would want us to look holistically at some of the issues that growing tech brings. Earlier we heard about the positives, there's also the negatives. And to incent the positives so that we would have more of a set of cooperation across the groups of people that it takes to do this work. When I was able to pull the lever for CS in Chicago, it took talking to the city government, it took talking to universities, it took being able to convince parents, grassroots, being able to have policies that encourage companies to help in that way, or universities to innovate. We also had to innovate around credential and training for our teachers to get pre-service, to work with universities to say, could you please bring such training and education into your university so our teachers can go and get it post pre-service and pre-service. The policies and the money that would allow that type of innovation to be supported for the long term would be very important.
So you want a venture fund for people being innovative inside school systems?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
When we talked about this earlier a few years ago, when there was conversation about real money going, real money's in the B's, it was to push the money out to the states because we know states have control over their education. However, the innovation in our state was not happening at the state level, it was happening in Chicago. But we didn't have the infrastructure to be able to make that happen, and we kind of shrugged our shoulders about how do you support innovation at that level. We also didn't have the ability, thank God for NSF funding, but it's highly restrictive. And so we didn't have the ability to continue a lot of the progress that we made without that funding running out, or without that funding not being appropriate for some of the work we were really trying to do.
Yeah, that's always a challenge when you seed the idea, but then there's no sustainability plan. And so the thing I like about this idea of investing in innovators who are working within the system is we're not going to get rid of the U.S. school system. It's not going to just go away. It's a big entrenched system. And so a lot of the times I try to stress to people, like, we are building computer science education for the United States as we speak. It is happening. Millions of dollars are pouring into ed tech investments in this space. Lots of people see that there's money in the future. And we have to be very careful and strategic about how we build it so that it's not broken for another 40 years. Because if we build a big exclusive system that's only for autodidactic kids that can go online and teach themselves with a free course, then we're going to leave behind all this other talent and all this other brain power that we have. So what I'm aiming for, what I hope for, if I could wave my magic wand, is I want computer science to be a totally normalized, fundamental part of education for all kids. And that all Americans, when they go through our school system, understand computation fundamentally, just like you understand gravity. We overcome these issues of underrepresentation in tech through bias and other mechanisms, whether it's economic, rural, et cetera. That all of our publicly funded schools, at minimum, are equipped with a diverse group of prepared teachers that have the tools they need. To establish rigorous CS education programs, because playing a game online for an hour is not computer science any more than doing a math puzzle is math. You need to practice these things, and you need to practice them from the time you're little until you graduate. And I want it to be valued outside. So one of my greatest happiness comes from the fact that the Girl Scouts now has 78 computer science and cybersecurity and engineering badges across all age levels. It is a completely normal part of being a Girl Scout that you do computing. So I think that this will give us economic growth. If we have a talent pool that understands computation and understands the implications of it, it will help us with AI, with security, innovation across all sectors, including climate change and biology. Equity. Think about tech is unbounded by space. Like physically, you do not have to be in any particular place to work in technology. So think about the economic growth for rural communities, for communities being affected by climate change, and that's affecting their economies. For underrepresented and low-income communities, we need to get tech off the coasts and spread it across the nation. And then security and sovereignty. Like, we need to all understand the implications of technology as we are going about our lives, whether we work in this sector or not, because so much of the threats that we experience, there's a human error component. So that's my sort of call to action. And then, Brenda, thinking about the people, the thousands of young and old female technologists that you work with, how could we inspire them to public service? What could we do to get more women technologists to think about contributing to some of these big intractable problems we have through either public service at the state level or in the university level? How can we make that happen?
Well, so it's all of the above. It's getting them exposed in their educational spaces. It's creating activity that allows the grown folks, the parents, to understand that the short-term gain could be from converting folks who are already in their degreed space. There's not one place I go where someone doesn't say to me, how do I get in? I'm an accountant, I'm in marketing, I'm doing all these other things. How do I become a technologist? We create pathways for them so that they can contribute. And we change the narrative that you have to have been coding since you were 3 in order to be successful at being a computer scientist. So a lot of this is about narrative. It's about the pictures. We need to change the images. My sister's an attorney. And it's one of those areas where more women became attorneys over the years. And she said, I actually even credit it to the fact that in movies and in a lot of the imagery, you saw women attorneys. People need to see the powerful contribution of women technologists, not just now, but throughout history, to be able to appreciate it so the gatekeepers can stop closing the door for those folks who they think don't do tech.
Absolutely agree. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you all for listening. And I encourage you, if you are inspired by a part of an idea or you have some idea, that you contact the Day One Project, because I personally did not really have any policy background before I joined the White House, and then I learned really quickly that there's a lot of us might think we don't have a role in that, but we actually do.